I just wanted to connect with you all because something really amazing is happening in Texas right now. And many of you who are watching are part of the reason why. For those of you who joined our phone bank on Monday with Oprah Winfrey and Willie Nelson and Bernie Sanders and Julian Castro and Stacey Abrams and Andrew Yang and literally thousands of other people, you helped us to make almost 3 million phone calls. We made 2,940,000+ phone calls to Texas voters just on Monday. And Monday was the first, or was a day before the first day of early voting. And I've got to think that has a little something to do with some of the crazy early voting turnout numbers on the first 2 days of early voting. And I'm going to go through them in just a second so that you, if you're not familiar with this, and if you haven't been tracking what's been happening in Texas, we can bring you into what is a really beautiful developing story, especially so because this is one of the most voter suppressed states in the entire country. And it has been for the last 144 years. This may be the year 2020 that we truly break through that and overcome those tactics of voter suppression and voter intimidation and voter exclusion and voter disenfranchisement. And it will happen because of all of you who helped on Monday and who helped on other phone banks that we've had. It'll be because of the extraordinary candidates that we have on the ballot this year. We're going to be able to meet 4 of them in just a little bit, starting with Sima Ladjevardian, who's running against Dan Crenshaw for U.S. Congress. We'll also meet 3 state house candidates in a year where Democrats have a chance to win control of the state house for the first time in 20 years. And the reason why that is so important is not only do we have a Democratic majority that can move forward on expanding healthcare in the least insured state in the country, not only will we have a Democratic majority that can ensure that Texas confronts the threat of climate change before it is too late, not only will we have a Democratic majority that can pass gun sense legislation that can be on the front lines of criminal justice reform and reforming how we police in this state and by extension, this country. We will also, ladies and gentlemen, have a Democratic majority that can begin the critically important work of dismantling the infrastructure of voter suppression and voter intimidation. That is the most onerous voter ID laws in the country. That is the worst racial gerrymander in the United States. That is more than 750 polling place closures over the last 8 years, just in the state of Texas, far more than in any other state. And those polling places that were closed were disproportionately concentrated in those communities with the fastest growing Black and Latino populations. Add to all of this, just week before last, Greg Abbott, our Republican governor, closed down all of the satellite absentee ballot drop-off locations, meaning that no matter what county you live in, no matter what distance you'd have to drive, if you want to be able to drop off an absentee ballot and not put it in the U.S. mails because for maybe good reasons you are a little bit suspicious of the ability of the U.S. mails to carry that absentee ballot at a moment that the President of the United States is slowing down and undermining the U.S. mails, you only have one spot to drop that off in now, thanks to our governor, the latest voter suppression tactic in Texas. We elect that Democratic majority. They dismantle all of that infrastructure of suppression and allow this democracy to really thrive. Allow every single one of us, especially those in communities of color, because that's been the targeted population in Texas for voter suppression. Black Texans, Latino Texans, Texans really in any community of color in any one of our 254 counties. I'm especially interested in seeing those Texans be able to fully participate in our democracy. And so the candidates who are running, those state house candidates, those U.S. congressional candidates, their supporters and volunteers and family members and friends who comprise those campaigns. And then everyone who along the way over the last decade, or in some cases decades, those Democratic Party chairs who were walking in the wilderness without any support, functionally speaking, from anyone else. Those community organizers, I think of the Texas Organizing Project, TOP, and others who have specifically and intentionally targeted those lower propensity voters in communities of color to make sure that they have what they need in terms of information to vote, that they understand the rules, what they'll have to bring to prove their identity, at the ballot box and help them make a positive decision to vote. That has transformed this state from not a red state, but from a non-voting state into one that today is now voting. And so let me read you this is as of last night, okay? So I don't have all of today's update, but after 2 full days of early voting in Texas, you've got the following. Across the state, the largest counties are significantly increasing voter turnout over their previous records. So Dallas, Tarrant, Travis, Hidalgo County all posted numbers around their previous voter turnout levels, which is good. And it means that there's room to grow and we can do better. Collin County, El Paso County, where I'm transmitting from, Williamson County, all broke their previous voter turnout records by 25%. And that's just in the first 2 days. Galveston, Nueces, Cameron County, Go Cameron County and Brownsville all broke their previous voter turnout records by over 50% in just the first 2 days of early voting. And then here's the all-time outshine stars of the state of Texas right now. These 2 counties, Denton County in North Texas and Harris County in Southeast Texas, home to Houston, have more than doubled previous turnout records. Folks, there's a political science word for that, and that is nuts. This is nuts. It would be nuts just on its own. It's even more so given how hard the Republican leadership in this state has tried to keep people from voting in Texas. And the people of Texas are having none of it. They are willingly standing in lines. I got a text from a gentleman, Marlon, who I met in the 2017-2018 campaign. I met him in Fort Bend County. He sends me a text Tuesday morning, first day of early voting, says something's going on with the voting machines in Fort Bend. There's been a programming or computer error, and this line is queued up, and it's getting really long. There are people who are in walkers, older people who shouldn't really be out at all, and yet who are persisting in this line. Some who have to leave because they got to go to work or get back home, or just can't literally physically stand in this line anymore. They eventually fixed those voting machines in Fort Bend. Marlon spent 7 hours in an early voting line. And on the one hand, I am so proud of Marlon and everyone who stood in that line, because they were standing not for themselves, but for all of us, not just for the state of Texas, but for this country, and not just for this next election, but for our entire democracy. And on the other hand, I am so deeply disappointed that any American in what is purported to be the world's greatest democracy is forced to stand in line for 7 hours during early voting just to cast their ballot. Folks, that's not an accident. That is by design in the state of Texas. And again, we win these important state house elections, these congressional elections, and then turn out up and down the ballot. We can begin to change this so no one ever has to be put through that again. And then here's the last big part of my theory on the case. We get out there and we vote for Akilah Bacy and Natali Hurtado and Ann Johnson for state rep. We get out there and vote for Sima Ladjevardian for U.S. Congress. We get out there and vote for M.J. Hagar for U.S. Senate, Krista Castaneda for Railroad Commissioner. We get out there and vote at any level of this ticket, and all those votes rise to the top of the ticket, and they help Joe Biden become the first Democratic nominee since 1976, almost a half century now, to win the Electoral College votes in Texas. And folks, if Joe Biden does that on election night, and by the way, Texas's returns will be posted on election night, unlike Pennsylvania, which may take days or even weeks to know the total, in which time Donald Trump may try to prematurely, illegitimately, illegally claim a victory. He may try to steal this election. He may try to contest it in the courts, all the way up to the Supreme Court, where he has warned us that he picked this nominee to serve in that 9th place on the Supreme Court so that she can help decide the outcome of the election. That could be our fate, folks, unless Texas comes through. And that's why Texas has to come through on election night. On election night, we know Joe Biden then is the next president of the United States, and it becomes mathematically, psychologically, politically, in every way that matters, impossible for Donald Trump to hold on to power, to claim victory, to serve another term. That's how important Texas is, and that's how important these races are. A couple of other things I want to tell you about what is so extraordinary about Texas this year. We just got the latest numbers on voter registration. And I want to thank all of our Powered by People volunteers who helped to register voters. Almost 300,000 voters were added in the last 2 weeks before the registration deadline. This represents 1.8 million more registered voters than in 2016. 1.8 million more people have registered since Hillary Clinton became the closest Democratic nominee in decades in terms of her performance in Texas. We just added almost 2 million new voters since then. 1 million have registered since the 2018 midterms. When I ran against Ted Cruz and lost by 215,000 votes, the closest margin for a Democrat in forever, as good as that was, we have just added 1 million more voters. That's a whole state's worth of voters that were just added to Texas, in North Texas, in Southeast Texas, where I am, in far West Texas, along the border, in East Texas. Every single part of Texas added net new voters. And I got to tell you, from every bit of data I've seen, those new voters trend to be Democrats, or at least much more open to our ideas than we have traditionally believed Texas voters to be. This bodes very well if we can complete the job and finish the turnout. Before I bring on Sima Ladjevardian, who is a candidate for Congress in Houston, Texas, running against Dan Crenshaw, who is probably Donald Trump's single greatest enabler in the House of Representatives. So you think about everything that you don't like about Donald Trump: the kids in cages, the openly trafficking in racism, the nearly 220,000 of our fellow Americans killed by COVID, the nearly 17,000 of our fellow Texans killed by COVID. When you think about Donald Trump being responsible for that, think about Dan Crenshaw helping him to do each and every single one of those things. So we're going to have her on in just a second. Cynthia just sent me a beautiful touch message and says she took a chair when she went to vote. Cynthia Cano, who you all know if you follow our live streams, who traveled the 254 counties of Texas with me, who is such an important part of what we do in Powered by People. She was one of those who went to vote on the first day of early voting, got in line at 6:30 p.m. And folks, as long as you get in line before 7 p.m. or whenever the polls close in your county, then you can stay in that line until you vote. And so she waited for more than an hour. She brought her own chair. If you want to help us in this turnout, you can join a phone bank tonight. Tonight, we will be calling the Texas voters who have yet to vote. Again, more than 1 million voted just on the first day. We had a lot more yesterday. A lot more are going to be voting today, but there will still be a significant number, measured in the millions, who have yet to cast their ballot. And we want to make sure that they make a plan to vote. We want to help answer any questions they have about voting. We want our democracy to work at its moment of greatest test, to reveal the greatest truth of this country, that we are better than Donald Trump and his enablers. If you want to help us do that, I believe that Cynthia has pinned a link at the bottom of the Facebook screen. And you can go to that link, you can RSVP, you can join the 1,600, or Kate, you told me there were 1,587 people who had already signed up for tonight's phone bank, which is awesome. Thank you, every one of you, 1,587 volunteers who signed up. But let's add to that. Let's see if we can't get closer to 2,000 volunteers making phone calls tonight. That allows us to make literally hundreds of thousands of phone calls tonight before the fourth day of early voting begins. So please, please, please sign up for that. And we will try to give you all some shout outs as people sign on. Julie says we have to win to change voter suppression and gerrymandering. Storm says, keep it up. Thanks to everybody who's joining. Let me now bring on Sima Ladjevardian. Aaron, if you wouldn't mind bringing up her video as well. Sima is a very good friend of mine, someone I met in 2017, early in 2017, when I was the longest of long shot candidates for the United States Senate, when no one in Texas outside of El Paso had really heard of me yet. Sima in Houston, in Harris County, in Southeast Texas, really took a chance on me and encouraged me and got behind me and connected me with other folks in Houston, other people across the state of Texas, and really through how compelling she is when she's asking you to get behind something. She helped to bring so many people over to my side, was part of that 254 county strategy the largest grassroots campaign that had been run in the state of Texas, and had a lot to do with the success that we saw down ballot. Lizzie Panel Fletcher winning in the Houston area, Colin Allred in North Texas, 12 new state House members, and 17 African-American women elected to judicial positions in Harris, Texas. So, Sima Ladjevardian, welcome to the live stream.
Hi, Beto. So excited to be here with you. It's been amazing few days, kicked off by your Monday, all day long, calling people to come out and vote. So it's just great to be here.
Sima, isn't that crazy that we were able to, on Monday, over the course of 12 hours, make more than 2.94 million phone calls? I should just say 3 million, but I want to be a little bit more precise than that. Just under 3 million phone calls. Our target was 1 million. We had a stretch goal of 1.5 million. Let's see if we can get to 1.5. We'll tell everyone 1 million, and then we'll blow it out of the water with 1.5. And then we crept up on 2 million. And then when Willie Nelson came on, every special guest was amazing, but when Willie Nelson came on, he and his wife Annie supercharged those thousands of volunteers who've shown up, probably not at all for me, and maybe a little bit for phone banking, but all the way for Willie. He convinced them to stay on the Zoom and on the phones and to make those phone calls, and got us up to 3 million. And I'm still a little bit stunned that we were able to do that. And it feels a little bit like 2018 when we were out there hustling. So let me ask you, how does your campaign feel? You're running against, I just mentioned this earlier, probably almost certainly Donald Trump's most effective enabler, Dan Crenshaw, who's really become a darling of the far radical right, who's raised a lot of money, who, most people as an incumbent in a district that has trended or tended to vote for Republicans is probably the odds-on favorite. You're no stranger to long odds campaigns. How are you feeling right now with 19 days out before this thing is decided?
I mean, look, Beto, the excitement on the ground is incredible. The people know how important this is. From people showing up on Monday in general, people showing up in Harris County, the number of voters that have come out in my district in general, I think it's just a very fundamental question that people are looking for leadership who actually represent them, cares, don't lie to them. Crenshaw has really been lying about the COVID situation, putting out really bad disinformation. He's been trying to cut healthcare in the middle of a pandemic. He's been broken his promises. So there's been just so many things. People are looking for someone who actually delivers and brings people together, up and down the ticket from Joe Biden down. And I see in this district the excitement of all the volunteers, and I see the change happening. You only lost this district by 3,000 votes. We've had more than 60,000 registrants in this district. It's extremely diverse, 40% minority. The excitement is there, and the change is coming. It's exciting.
Sima, beyond the negative things that we associate with Dan Crenshaw, holding fundraisers, which there's no crime in doing that, but doing it in person without masks and modeling precisely the wrong behavior, the kind of behavior that gets people killed, ridiculing the use of masks at the beginning of this pandemic when it was beginning to spread like wildfire across the country. So irresponsible, and Sima, I want you to tell us about this, so irresponsible that I believe a number of doctors in the greater Houston area wrote a letter to Dan Crenshaw. Tell us about that.
So basically, it all started first in March about, masks don't help, but continued on in April, May, just saying, questioning even if masks help. And then in June, holding actually in-person events, maskless events. And in the middle of July, where our cases have spiked the most, we had the most death than in the past 4 months. We had 100 doctors, bipartisan, who voted for Trump, who voted for Hillary, basically begging him to stop putting out that kind of disinformation because, people are being killed here. And he just completely ignored it. Again, ends up having, maskless event in August. And then in September says the president downplaying the virus is because he had good intentions. So it's just incredible that there is zero kind of, he doesn't understand that so many people look up to him. I mean, I was telling him, young kids, my son had gone to visit a couple of friends masked outdoors, and all of them are like, if the politicians don't wear masks, what do I care? So of course he left because he was like, what does that mean? So as somebody who holds that kind of a power, that kind of the trust to really not look at science and listen to what doctors, tell you. And then his answer is that I bought 50,000 masks, where he never bothered to wear one of them. And it's just unconscionable to me, that kind of a behavior.
Yeah, it is so irresponsible. And, I think sometimes these far right radicals resort to the following argument. How in the world could we control this pandemic? It's an act of God, or it was sent to us by China. There's someone else to blame. There's literally, for a party that has so long touted the mantra of personal responsibility, there is zero personal responsibility on their part, both in terms of how they personally handle themselves and model the behavior that we should be expecting from our fellow Texans and our fellow Americans. And then the epic failure in leadership from those who are in positions of power right now, from Dan Crenshaw, who clearly has the ear of the president because he's the president's favorite member of Congress, to the president himself, who obviously is willfully endangering those around him and the American public. There's no other way to explain the fact that we are 4% of the globe's population, and yet we now comprise 21 or 22% of the globe's deaths. We're the wealthiest, the most powerful, the most medically advanced country on the face of the planet. The only thing that explains it is Donald Trump and Dan Crenshaw and people like that who have abused their positions of public trust to play politics and endanger the public at great expense, including the loss of lives by the tens of thousands in America and by the thousands in the state of Texas. Sima, tell us.
Just to add to that, it kills me that he turned around and he says the Texas per capita death rate has, we've outperformed most countries. Like to even look at human life and not give value to it, and it's just unconscionable to me. I'm just flabbergasted at people not understanding that we're talking about people's lives. And in addition, so many people have been affected with COVID in other ways, and the side effects. As a breast cancer survivor, like I had my checkups during this time, and the doctor said, "Do not come." So many people have foregone really life-saving treatments that later on could help them, that they haven't done it because of the way this has been handled. And so many people will have long-term pre-existing conditions. We have 7 million people nationwide who were affected by this virus that are going to be another pre-existing condition. So, it's just serious things that they're just not paying attention to at all.
Folks, we are talking to Sima Ladjevardian, who is a candidate for Congress, who would be someone in Congress about whom you could be so proud, who's going to work to expand access to healthcare to everyone, who's going to be a strong gun sense candidate. And Sima, there are some Moms Demand Action volunteers who are on the live stream right now singing your praises, and they're absolutely right. She's going to help to make Texas a leader in confronting climate change before it's too late. She's going to be a leader on criminal justice reform. So not only do you get rid of one of the worst members of Congress, Dan Crenshaw, who every step of the way has enabled Donald Trump and has allowed him to do the kind of things that are literally destroying this country. But in his place, you actually get somebody that you can be proud of, who is going to make your life better, and by extension, all of our lives in this country, wherever you live. If you want to help Sima Ladjevardian, certainly if you live in her district and you want to phone bank for her or volunteer for her in some capacity, I know she would love that. But Sima, if somebody wants to make a donation to your campaign, how do they do that?
So the website is simafortx.com. You can go on the website and donate and volunteer. We need as many volunteers as possible and as many donations as possible. Dan Crenshaw takes corporate money. We don't do that. We take, it's a big grassroots movement. So whatever you can give helps us. It's such a close race. and we're being very strong in calling him out. Healthcare is the number one thing that I want to fight for. As Beto knows, we are the least covered state in the nation. It was before the pandemic, 1 out of 5, 1 out of 3 now. And I want to make sure that we protect our healthcare and not try to gut it, the way things are going, how he's been doing it. So please volunteer, please donate. We are fighting, as the vice president says, for the soul of this nation. And we really need leaders who make equality and diversity the expectation, not the exception. And I want to make sure that this incredible American dream that was afforded to me is available for everyone, and we make that a reality.
Folks, Sima Ladjevardian is the complete contrast to Donald Trump, a daughter of immigrants, someone whose focus has always been the community. I remember at the beginning of this pandemic, Sima was all about making sure that she could find PPE, personal protective equipment, get it to frontline workers. She would represent part of a community that has the largest medical center on planet Earth. She wanted to make sure that those frontline medical workers were taken care of. And then during the campaign, she wanted to make sure she was listening to their advice and sharing the best public health information. She volunteered and helped out on the food banks when people were having a hard time feeding themselves. And she believes in the best of us and believes that our diversity, and she would represent one of, I think, actually the most diverse city in the United States of America, that is in fact our strength, and that we don't have to fear the future. We really don't have to fear anything, that we can be confident, we can be bold, and we can take care of one another. And in so doing, make this a much stronger, better country in the process. And I want to say this, both as someone who knows Sima very well and who knows this district very well. She mentioned in 2018, we lost this district, an entire congressional district, by 3,000 votes. She also mentioned that since then, more than 60,000 additional people have been registered to vote. The voters are there, and we just need to make sure that we turn them out. So I know there's a link on the Chiron at the bottom of your screen. If you can go to Sima for Texas, Texas spelled TX, and learn a little bit more about her, make a donation, make sure that she has the resources to compete and to connect with those voters, and know that we would be grateful for it. Sima, we are so excited about you, so lucky to have you as a candidate in this race. Really looking forward to celebrating your well-earned victory over Dan Crenshaw on the night of November 3rd. It'll be one of the biggest upsets in Texas, one of the biggest upset congressional races in the country. So if you all want to help her be able to do that, please donate and support her. Sima, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Beto. Let's do this.
Let's do it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Sima Ladjevardian. And again, if you want to, let's say you're watching this from some other part of the country, you don't live in Texas, you don't live in Sima's district, but you care about what's happening here because you know that something very special is taking place in Texas based on the turnout numbers, based on the fact that Biden and Trump are polling neck and neck, based on the fact that MJ Hagar is just a point down to John Cornyn. Look, all of those races are important, but when we look at those down ballot candidates for Congress and State House and invest in their races, they now have the resources to, on the ground level, connect with more voters, frankly, than the Biden campaign has resources to connect with in Texas. They will turn those voters out for their own races, and then they will send them up ballot to the top of the ticket. So I'm so grateful that Sima is running and glad that she spent a little time with us. All right, we're going to switch gears and move to another part of the really critically important Harris County ballot. And listen, you don't have to live in Harris County. You don't even have to live in Texas to know that this is where all of the action is. I mentioned Harris County has doubled its early voting turnout on the first day of early voting. 128,000 ballots cast. That's more than all the ballots cast in the state of Georgia on the first day of early voting. It's more than the entire population of Orlando, Florida. I mean, this is a lot of people turning out. That Orlando number is actually for the first 2 days of early voting in Harris County. So who are the candidates that are generating all this interest and excitement? Certainly, we are excited about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And by the way, Senator Harris is coming to Texas in the next couple of days, and we welcome her to the state. Certainly, we're excited about the top of the ticket in Texas the U.S. Senate race and the Railroad Commissioner race with Christy Castañeda. But folks, I think the real energy, the real passion as I listen to and talk with voters is about the state house, because for the first time in 20 years, we stand a very good chance of winning a majority. And that means a majority ahead of redistricting. That means a majority that can dismantle that voter suppression that you've been reading and hearing so much about in Texas. That means a majority that we can be proud of. And so we're going to bring on 3 extraordinary women who are running to be part of that majority. And frankly, if they win these 3 races, we will have a majority in the state house in Texas. So I'd like to bring on Akilah Bacy, Ann Johnson, and Natali Hurtado. I've met and worked with all 3 of these extraordinary candidates. And folks, there are 150 state house districts, right? So there are a lot of people running. A lot of them are talented. You have among the very best of the best right here. And I can say that with full confidence because Powered by People has been hosting phone banks for the better part of this year. And we asked the candidates to participate in these phone banks, to join us, not just in raising volunteers, but to get on the horn with us for 2.5 hours. And all of these 3 candidates that you're about to meet put in the work. So they walk the talk. They don't just say what they're going to do. They don't just ask the rest of us to pitch in. They lead from the front and by example. So I'm going to ask each of them to in turn introduce themselves for maybe a minute or so, and then we can get into a conversation and learn a lot more about them. And I'm going to ask Cynthia to send me your questions. So if you're watching on Twitter, if you're watching on Facebook, after you hear Natali and Akilah and Ann introduce themselves and want to know more about them, send us your questions. I'll relay them to the candidates and we'll have a great conversation. So first up is Akilah Bacy. And Akilah Bacy has become a superstar. When I'm talking to people outside of Texas, they ask me about Akilah Bacy's race. And that really says something when you are a state house candidate in Harris County for folks around the country to know who you are. And in addition, y además, today is Akilah Bacy's birthday. So Akilah, happy birthday to you from everyone on the live stream and everyone in the state of Texas. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the race that you're running.
All right, well, thank you, Beto. Thank you for wishing the birthday wishes. And so this race out here in 138, it is so exciting. I got into this race because of what I saw in our courtrooms and what I saw, the work that needed to be done in our community. And that led me to being a community volunteer, serving and teaching ESL, civil rights classes, working with human trafficking victims, fighting for human trafficking victims, working on pro bono asylum cases. And in just every area where I saw there was a vulnerable population that wasn't being touched enough or that needed more help. And in all that, what it really boiled down to, what I saw was that so many of these communities, so many of the disenfranchised could be helped. And the government has the resources and the availability to help, but if only they were prioritized by our leaders. And so that's what pushed me into getting into this race. And we have ran with that message, shared that message across this district. And we have just received so much enthusiasm and excitement. I woke up early this morning and I spent a few hours down at the polls, and that was great talking to voters there. And then I came home and I got back on the phone for a few more hours to call more voters. And so we were able just to talk and listen to what it is that people cared about. And what they cared about are what we are all fighting for here, what we've been fighting for, and that's healthcare, that's education, that's their jobs, that's social justice. And so I'm just really excited about what we're looking forward to in the next 19 days.
I love it. Akilah, again, happy birthday. I bet you never thought this would be how you'd be spending a birthday as a candidate for the state legislature, working at the polls in the midst of a pandemic, safely keeping your distance from voters, but still wanting to make sure that you can be there for them and engage with them. And then, as you just said, and as I've seen you do, then hopping on the phones and reaching out to those voters who will decide the outcome of this election. Well, we are just so excited that you're running and so proud of the campaign that you're running. And I should say this, you and Ann and Natali are all in Sima Ladjevardian's district. And so when I was talking about all these votes flowing up, let's remember they also flow up to Sima as well. Okay, Ann Johnson, again, extraordinary candidate who really hustles. We will have a number of state house candidates on a given phone bank, making calls. And then you all may or may not know this, but afterwards I get a report on how many calls each of us made. And they'll tell me how many calls I made, how many Cynthia made, how many all of our phone bankers made. And I think Ann Johnson on one of these phone banks, like, had the record for most phone calls made of any volunteer. And I love that kind of candidate and that kind of campaign. She's running in a tough district, but a very winnable one. We won that district over Ted Cruz by a significant margin. But she's got her work cut out for her. And I think that's why she is working so hard. And it's one of the races that we are all watching so closely in the state of Texas. If Ann wins, we win that majority in the state legislature. So Ann, introduce yourself to the folks who are watching. Tell us a little bit about you and the campaign you're running.
Beto, thank you so much. It's great to be on with everybody. One of the best parts of this more than year of running in this race is getting to know the other House candidates that run, and Sima that's running to try to flip these seats. And all of us have been committed to changing the outlook in Texas. And I can say that being a native Texan. I grew up here in Houston. I'm the youngest of 6. My parents taught me the value of public service. My parents both started out as public school teachers before going into the law, and public service was an honor. And our state was always about protecting people over profits. But for the last 3 decades, we've been controlled by Republicans. And so we absolutely have a fight on our hands to flip the Texas House to restore the values that we hold dear. And this is not the first time I've taken on a tough fight. Many years ago, I was appointed to represent a 13-year-old little girl charged with prostitution. I believed that was wrong, took on the case, and after years of getting to the Texas Supreme Court, we created a landmark foundation that said kids are victims. They are not the offenders of human trafficking. I'm your former chief human trafficking prosecutor here in Harris County. And when we flip Texas, we get to take care of those who are vulnerable by finally expanding Medicaid and giving millions coverage, by finally advancing common sense gun reform, by finally rebuilding our economy around renewable energy, and by finally absolutely protecting public ed. We're coming off a lost decade of education and health. And we know if we don't get out there and hustle, those same Republicans are going to be in charge for another decade because of redistricting. And so, Beto, thank you for having me on the calls. Yesterday morning at the polls, Dana ran up to me and she said, "Hey, I want to take a photo with you. I saw you on the other night phone banking with us." And so you've allowed us to reach out to so many voters who would not have known about our campaign as state rep candidates. And so thank you for lifting up the entire state. You really gave us all courage in 2018 to get up and fight again, and you are lifting all of us again in 2020.
Well, it's mutual. I think in what is a really tough time for the country and the state for sure, and then a real struggle with some real suffering for so many who've lost a family member or lost a job or are really going through a hard time. The hope I have rests in you and Akilah and Natali and Sima, other candidates who are putting themselves out there. I know how hard this is, but what I don't know is how much harder it has become that you're having a campaign in the midst of a pandemic, and yet you all have been so tenacious and persistent. So I'm encouraged by that, and it makes me feel very good about your chances on the 3rd. Natali Hurtado, again, I don't know, Cynthia helped us to produce this amazing lineup, and we've been getting some really beautiful comments on the live stream about the powerhouse lineup today. So thank you, Cynthia, for getting us all together. Natali is another one of these candidates who has so impressed me with the way that she's approached this campaign. She is not expecting others to do for her what she can do for herself, whether it's making phone calls, whether it's going out there and putting up signs, or whether it's making the case in a very compelling, personal way, not with talking points, not with focus groups, not with consultants. With Natali, you're getting the real deal. And she is someone that I would be so proud, even though I don't live in her district, to, by extension, be representing us out here, to be in that majority. And I know we would be in good hands with Natali. So Natali, tell us a little bit about yourself, the campaign that you're running. And then we've got a lot of questions actually already pouring in. So I want to make sure that we get to as many of them as we can.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Beto, for that. I have to say, Akilah, happy birthday. I'd be remiss if I didn't put it out there publicly because she's a very good friend of mine. So Natali Hurtado, running in a seat where I was told in 2018, you have no way in hell any chance to flip that seat. It is historically red. It's going to stay red. And I kind of just said, you know what, I gotta do this. And I didn't have the money on my backing. I didn't have the money in my account. It was a matter of talking to people, knocking on doors, and just listening to what they had to say. And I always love to give you credit, Beto, for being on the top of that ticket, because if it were not for you, we wouldn't have the energy that we needed in 2018 to help me make my case for 2020. My story, I'm a native Houstonian, native Texan. I'm also first generation American. And wonderful upbringing. My parents, they met here in Houston, been married for almost 40 years come December. And, as you're in high school, you get a job. I started working at the Olive Garden, met a guy, and started dating for about 4 months. And my parents, they came with a lot of old world thinking, being immigrants, and gave us this ultimatum of either getting married or breaking up. And we knew everything because we were, young and dumb. And we got married. And about a year after that, we had our daughter, Madison. By this point, we were both working at the Olive Garden as servers, both attending University of Houston, go Cougs. And I remember taking him to work one day. We're both sharing, a car, and dropped him off, headed out to Walmart to get groceries, had Maddie in the back seat. And I got a call from a detective who informed me that he had been involved in a crime prior to knowing him. And literally overnight, I became a young single mother because he ended up getting 2 life sentences. And so you faced a crossroad, or I faced a crossroad of having to make this tough decision of, do I drop out of college so I can support my daughter? Or do I go move back in with my parents and work and finish school, knowing what it would mean for my future and more importantly, my daughter's future? And so that's what I did. And I'm proud to say that because of my family, because of the community that surrounded me, and more importantly, because of programs that were in place, social programs such as Medicaid, such as food stamps, I was able to survive and thrive. I graduated from U of H, went on to get my master's in public policy and public administration from St. Thomas, and met a great guy, got remarried, Air Force veteran, public service is in his blood as well. And we wanted to build on our family, and that's how we made it to this side of town. Like I said, a district that I never thought I would ever run for because of its history. And then you wake up in 2016 realizing that President Trump is our president, and the hate that he would spew on a day-to-day basis. And you ask yourself, or I ask myself, did I do enough? Did I do enough to prevent this from happening? And the answer was no. And so that's why in 2018, I was about 6 months pregnant with May, my youngest child. And I decided I'm going to get off the sidelines, and I'm going to run a race and then make the case that this is a district that can flip from red to blue. And that's exactly what we're doing. And it is just the biggest honor. I thank God every night for blessing me to be in this position, a position where in 2018, you couldn't get me to tell my story because I was ashamed of it. I was embarrassed. I didn't know how to tell my story. And then in talking with people day after day, block walk after block walk, and realizing it's my story that has made me who I am, created these convictions in me, and is the voice that we need in Austin to help those that do not feel like they're being represented, is why I'm running. And so I'm just so committed to bringing this passion and working alongside these amazing women and making great change come to Texas.
I love it. I've got to tell you, so Cynthia's relaying the comments that are coming in on Twitter and Facebook, and some of the questions which I will pose to you all. But there's a lot of love for the three of you. A million happy birthdays for Akilah. A lot of people saying, what an amazing lineup. I love that we're connecting with people who did not know you all existed and didn't know about your candidacies and your campaigns. And so that you all know, we've got a kind of a chyron running on the bottom, and it's got your websites on them. So encourage anyone who would like to learn more about these candidates or donate to them. Remember, folks, they're in the final stretch. Voting has already begun in the state of Texas. We're in the 3rd day of early voting, but there's still, tens of thousands of voters that they could potentially reach, and they need the resources and the money to be able to do that. So consider making a donation of whatever amount that you can. And then there's also a lot of people commenting about the number of women who are running in Texas today. And we didn't go out and try to find 4 extraordinary women right now. It just happens that the 4 extraordinary candidates running for these positions all happen to be women right now. And that is so encouraging and not lost on everyone who's watching this. And let me ask you something. So on almost every issue, I agree with you. I'm excited about the positions that you're taking. And again, like Natali, I don't think you're looking at polls or listening to consultants. You're listening to your constituents or your future constituents, and making sure that you're addressing their concerns on, you know, the big picture policy issues. You know, we all know where you are, and you're happy to talk about those a little bit. But could you tell us a thing or two that's unique to your district where you think you could make a difference? Some folks are asking who may not exactly know where your district is. They want to know what is unique about it, and how do you uniquely serve that district in the state house?
So House District 134 is inside the loop in Houston on the west end. And when we were, before COVID, in the primary, when we were knocking on doors, this is one of the biggest distinctions between myself and our opponent. I would knock on the door, and if I saw any kind of children's toy in that room, I knew almost immediately the mother in that house was going to run to the door. And I would often wear my mom's Demand Action t-shirt, and she would come up and say, "Tell me what you're going to do about gun violence." And so that's a massive distinction, because I'm running against a Republican incumbent who has bragged of her A rating on the NRA, supported and promoted open carry guns in schools, made it easier for Texans to go out and get a silencer. And I can't think of anybody in Texas that needs a silencer, but it might be on the NRA wish list. And so that's what the NRA said after last session. The NRA, despite the fact that we have had 4 of the top 10 mass shootings in the United States, in Texas, in the last 2 years, the NRA called this last session one of their finest ever. And that's because they have Republicans beholden to their interests and not the people of Texas. So that's a significant issue to help moms who are terrified to send their kids to school. And then also the medical center. This district represents half of the medical center. And I'm running against somebody who's vehemently opposed the Affordable Care Act for a decade and single-handedly tabled the discussion on Medicaid expansion in 2017 and then walked the vote in 19. So when you talk about providing protections for people with pre-existing conditions like myself, I have been there, I have lived it, and I'm going to fight to expand healthcare for all Texans. And so those are the 2 major issues. And there are many more, but those are the 2 that really, between COVID and having shootings in schools in our district and having a mass shooting in our district a few years ago, those are the issues that are really constituents are recognizing this current Republican is not representing them.
You know, and I have always prided myself on, you know, my pursuit of bipartisanship and trying to find the best in those who may not see things exactly the way that I do, and find the common ground where we can. And I hope we all feel that way. But I'll tell you, for those who aren't familiar with this race, and I'm so glad you said what you did, because she has a particularly unique challenge in that the Republican Party, especially in this day and age, is just so extreme. And in Texas, it's the extreme of the extreme. And so for any member of the Republican Party who's in the state legislature, who's not the most extreme, can almost seem moderate by contrast. But, you know, Ann just enumerated all of the things that the incumbent against whom she's running has supported or undermined to the detriment of all of us here in Texas. And so, you know, once Ann is in office and is part of that majority, I know she will immediately reach across the aisle to try to find common ground or consensus on expanding healthcare, supporting our public school teachers, passing gun sense legislation that, you know, protects the Second Amendment and acknowledges the very responsible gun owners that we have here in Texas, while at the same time protecting the lives of our fellow Texans. And I think it's so important that we acknowledge that, because that is a unique dynamic to Ann's race. And it's why she really needs your help to get that message out there. I think people really need to understand that contrast in her district. Natali, Chris is asking me this. I know this, I'll warn you, I hated getting this question when I was a candidate, because and so you are free to riff beyond the constraints of the question. But what would be your first policy action as a state representative? There were 17 million things I always wanted to do. If you had to pick one or a few that you think are really important to focus on, what are you getting ready for day one in January 2021 when you hit the ground running?
So for me, it's like I said, it hits a chord, a personal one, just the expansion of Medicaid. I think it's about finding those allies that are willing to make it happen. It's absolutely absurd. The state has yet to expand Medicaid. Knowing personally what that means to families, what that means to individuals, it's about damn time that we get it done. And so that is my top thing. One of the things that, looking back at in 2018, I always do this compare and contrast with when I ran last time. I remember going to the Houston Chronicle screening and meeting my opponent for the first time. And the question was asked, would you be in support of expanding Medicaid? For me, it was a no-brainer, absolutely. And I was shocked to hear that he said he would expand Medicaid as well, coming from a Republican, and so I actually left that meeting thinking, hey, maybe he's not that bad of a guy, he's not a bad Republican. And then of course you get into office, and then you get a vote by your name, and people see where you really stand. And he ended up voting against the expansion of Medicaid. And for me, it spoke to his lack of character. It spoke to his disinterest in representing the folks that live in his district. It's one of those things that I've told myself time and time again, I'm going to be advocating hard. I'm going to be fighting hard. And I know I'm going to have the people in place with me to make sure that we get this done, because it's about time.
I was so surprised. You mentioned it. There's one thing when you just rely on someone's word or their rhetoric. It's another thing when you see their actions. We looked at votes that the current legislature, or the legislature that was seated in 2019, took on critical issues like healthcare, public education, Ann was talking about earlier, like gun safety. And I think part of the challenge we have in Texas is not enough sunlight has been brought to these votes, and there has not been any real consequence or accountability. And really in the three of you, I see accountability. There really has not been that contest of records and ideas and vision and action, what it is you want to do when you get into office. And I think what you just said and the way you just said it, especially in contrast to your opponent, makes the case. And then I think, knowing you as well as I do, you expect to be held accountable when you yourself are in office. You've said these things that you're going to pursue and focus on. You want us to make sure that you actually do once you're there. And I love that. That's the kind of leadership that I think has been missing in Texas.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I mean, that's the whole point of this. It's about, I don't like to talk much, to be completely honest with you, when I'm talking to voters. It's about hearing what they have to say and hearing, their frustrations and how they feel that they're not, being advocated for. And I think that's the thing. We just have too many people in Austin that are telling us what's best for our lives and not listening to what we think is best for our lives.
Absolutely. When you have one party rule in Texas, which has been the case, unfortunately, for most of our adult lives, that lack of competition produces a lack of accountability and a lack of results. And how do you become worst in so many of these important measures? Lowest right. in healthcare access, almost bottom of the barrel in terms of what we pay our teachers and what we're able to get out of our public education system, despite their heroic effort. Ann mentioned 4 of the top 10 or 10 worst gun violence massacres in the United States take place in El Paso and in the Permian Basin and Sutherland Springs and Santa Fe High School, all within a 2-year period. We have to do better, but until we have leaders like you willing to put yourselves out there, we won't. And it's part of why I'm asking the folks who are watching to consider making a donation to each of their campaigns. If you want to donate your time, I will take it. And we have a phone bank for these candidates tonight. We have another one for some of these candidates on Saturday, and really for the duration of early voting. I will take your time so that we can make these phone calls. They need your money. They really do. And you would not believe how far they can take $25 or $50 more if you can donate it right now. And in fact, Ann Lynn says, "Go, Ann. I met you last year at my first Mom's Demand meeting. I've donated before, and I'll send in one more donation today." So go, Lynn. Thank you for doing that. And then Akilah, you've got a shout out from Tina. She says, "Happy birthday. I helped you to handwrite Post-it notes." So I guess when you guys are maybe dropping literature, Tina wants you to know that she's wishing you a happy birthday. I think this may have come from Cleo, but I'll ask this of Akilah. How do you feel about guns in schools? And I don't want to presume that I know the answer. I don't know if I've heard you speak about it, but for those who do not know, Literally days after the El Paso shooting, what had passed in the 2019 legislative session came into law, and it in no way restricted or made Texas safer when it came to our gun laws. It expanded where and how you could carry guns in Texas, including onto school property in some instances. So, Akilah, that question for you. How do you feel about guns in our schools?
You know, I wish I could really just make this a really long point, but I think it's asinine that people want to bring guns into our schools. You don't see a problem and then exacerbating the problem by bringing in what is help people cause that issue. What we need to bring into our schools besides guns are counselors. We need to bring in mental health professionals. We need to bring in more support for our teachers. We need to bring in more funding. There's a lot of the things that we need to bring into our schools. And let me tell you, guns is nowhere on the list whatsoever.
I agree with you very, very strongly. And my feeling is, and who knows, somebody will know how this stuff polls, but my feeling is that gun owners, non-gun owners, Republicans, Independents, Democrats all agree with you as well. And, and so many of our candidates, all three of you, in fact, have just made an excellent case for supporting our public schools, our public school educators, many of whom are working a second and a third job, many of whom, despite working that second and third job, are out of their own pocket paying for school supplies, or if that kid's on free and reduced breakfast and lunch, that teacher pays for their dinner because she knows that he may not have a warm meal waiting for him at home. And Akilah, you put it so well, for them to also then have to worry about somebody bringing in a firearm and threatening those students for whom they've already sacrificed so much is absolutely ludicrous. And it's not something that Texas should be known for. And unfortunately, we are until you all win your races and until you all are seated in January of 2021. So I want to thank each of you. I know how busy you are. It's the middle of early voting. You've got to be able to go out and talk to those voters, go to the polling sites, call people on these phone banks, and that you took 30 minutes to talk with us, to take some questions. We are so grateful to you. And one last appeal to everybody who's watching. Their websites are posted at the bottom of your screen. Please take a moment to find a little bit more about them and then to make a donation. You should donate to Joe Biden, right? But will your $5 make the difference in his campaign? I don't know. He raised $336 million last month. Your $5 or $25 or $50 in any one or maybe all three of these campaigns will go so far in printing the literature that they hand out at the polling location or hang on someone's door, in paying that staff, or getting TV advertisements up on the air so that they can communicate a message at a time that they cannot hold in-person rallies or town halls. So making this request of all of our Powered by People friends and everybody who's on the live stream and Twitter right now, you all be well. Akilah, I hope you find some way to celebrate, or maybe we would postpone your birthday celebration till the night of November 3rd. But even though we're out here in El Paso, we're with you all in Harris County. You are making the world so proud at a moment that democracy is an open question. The turnout that the three of you have helped to produce in Harris County makes me emotional. And you're doing it against some of the toughest odds and some of the worst voter suppression. So, and Akilah, Natali, keep it up. We're proud of you and we're with you. Adios.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. So, folks, we're going to wrap up, but you can tell why I'm so excited about these four candidates that we just met. Sima Ladjevardian running a really, really tough race against the single greatest enabler of Donald Trump in the House of Representatives, Dan Crenshaw. If you are sick of seeing that guy on TV, if you want to make sure that this election not only defeats Donald Trump, but Trumpism, get behind Sima Ladjevardian. She is the antidote to all of that, and we want to see her win. And then each of the three candidates that we just met who are running for the state house are trying to represent districts that are within Sima Ladjevardian's congressional district. So all of these races are mutually reinforcing. We help Sima, we end up helping those three challengers. We help those three challengers, Natali, Ann, and Akilah. We end up helping Sima, MJ, Joe Biden. It's this virtuous cycle throughout the ticket. And to everyone in Texas especially, the world is taking note of the turnout that you have produced so far. If you have not voted yet, please vote now through the 30th of October. That's the early voting period in the state of Texas. And it is far easier and more convenient to vote during early voting now through October 30th than it is to wait until Election Day. However, because of work or school or family or just life, you may have no other option but to vote on November 3rd. And if that's the case, vote on November 3rd and make sure that you get it in. Last thing that I'm going to say, and I think that Aaron's got it running across the bottom of our screen. We would love to have your help on the phone bank tonight. With the help of thousands of volunteers, we made almost 3 million phone calls to Texas voters on the eve of early voting on Monday. That had to have had some impact on the turnout that we saw the following day. I would love for you to help me keep it up, right? We don't want to, on the night of November 3rd, look back on this day and the days that follow and say, man, I wish I had done more. I wish I'd gotten on that phone bank. I don't like making phone calls. It's inconvenient. I got a lot going on in my life right now. Those are all excuses, maybe even valid ones in any other year. In this, the definitional year of this country's life, you know, which course do we take in 2020? This state, the deciding state in the outcome of this election, you want to know that you've done all you can. So sign up for the phone bank tonight. You will automatically be entered into a drawing for one of these beautiful Calling Texas Powered by People t-shirts, collector's items. You cannot buy them in any store. You cannot pay US currency for them. They're only available to those who step up and volunteer, and we'll be giving away some Powered by People Calling Texas t-shirts tonight. All right, good to be with you all. Thanks again to all of our candidates who joined us on the live stream today, and we will see you very soon. Adios.